person who ever had this idea, but it's the first time I've ever heard of it. And so it came about from two quotes that I read. One of them was a very short one, and one of them was a very long one. The first quote is from G.K. Chesterton. And G.K. Chesterton was one of those people in the early 20th century who was a man of great interest in many things. He was also not a very nice person. But he was fundamentally interested in history and in ways that many people of the time were not. So I'm going to read this quote from him, and it's somewhat long, so I hope you'll bear with me. But this was sort of the genesis of this class, and it is, "No wise man will wish to bring more long words into the world, but it may be allowable to say that we need a new thing, which may be called psychological history. I mean the consideration of what things meant in the mind of a man, especially an ordinary man, as distinct from what is defined or deduced merely from official forms or political pronouncements. It is not enough to say that a tomcat was a totem. We want to know what it felt like. What did soldiers feel? What did vassals feel? So long as we neglect this subjective side of history, which may be more simply called the inside of history, there will always be a certain limitation on that science which can be better transcended by art. So long as a historian cannot do that, fiction will be truer than fact. There will be more reality in a novel, yes, even in a historical one." And what he means by that is if we take history to mean objects, and the placement of those objects where we find them, this cup, this sword, we find an archaeological find, and then we say this is what history was. But these objects have meaning. These objects were used. And the second quote is very short, and it's from a very familiar work. It's actually from Beowulf. And it said, "Their coats of mail shone, hard-formed, iron rings shining, resounding in their armor. When first into the hall, in their terror ornaments they came advancing." And it was the first part of the last line, their terror ornaments. What they're talking about is their arms and their armor. And so these two quotes had me thinking about how the arms and armor of a person weren't just the function of protective. They weren't just the value of how it kept the user alive, but how they were perceived by all the people in that environment around them, and how they were also perceived psychologically by the person who wore them. So, picture this. I'm going to put this in a particular historical framework because it's easiest to talk about a specific time when we talk about abstract concepts. And so for this time, we're going to talk about England in the mid to late 800s. So for this period of time, what has happened is we've had the first of the Viking invasions of England. The only Saxon kingdom left in England is Wessex. Wessex is also the richest kingdom in Anglo-Saxon England. Therefore, it's the strongest. We have multiple Viking kingdoms. The reality is almost all of them are Danish. Vikings are ubiquitously called Danes at this particular time period, though in fact there were Norwegians and Frisians, and including some renegade Franks that were called Vikings. The vast majority are from Denmark at the time. So, picture this now. We're going to give you two people who did not exist. But these two people we're going to call Sven. Sven is a 17-year-old Dane. He's the son of a Danish war leader who's in service to a greater war leader. Their names are unimportant. And the second person is Beowulf, who is an Anglo-Saxon freeman who works land for a specific landowner. Now, understand when I say he was a freeman, that's not what our modern concept would be. He has very limited legal protections. And even the legal protections that he has are functionally non-existent. He is, in fact, only protected by whoever he is a service to and the strength that they have. So, the area that we're going to talk about is the Kingdom of Mercia. Mercia is, at this time period, less a kingdom and more two spheres of influence. The north part of Mercia is held by primarily Danish overlords and some Saxon overlords who have paid fealty to greater Danish lords. And the Saxon Mercia is nominally held by Saxons. Southern Mercia is nominally held by Saxons. So, what this means is Mercia is rife with fighting, with raiding, with invasion. It is the contested battleground because if they can control Mercia, Wessex falls next. And Wessex is the end goal. All of the great Viking invasions, once the conquest of Northumbria was finished, the goal was Wessex. The great heathen army that was gathered, this is a little later, but that sole purpose was the conquest of Wessex. It was not of England, but of Wessex. So, talk about a little bit about warfare and how it is done in this time period. The three forms of warfare is there's ship-to-ship fighting. We're not going to go over that. It's not really relevant to this discussion. Then there's raiding. Now, raiding is done specifically for the purpose of plunder. You're not trying to acquire land. All you want is silver, horses, cattle, or slaves. That's it. Many of the great Roman antiquities at the time that would have been found in England were destroyed during these raids because they would be hacked up to be made more portable. And then the third is actually invasion with the purpose of taking and controlling a landmass. So, you're Sven. Sven is 17. You have fought before, but you've never been in a battle. This matters. Because at the time period where you earn your greatest reputation is in the shield wall. That's how the great battles of this time are fought. Face to face. So, now, we need to draw a parallel between the Danish warriors of the time and the Anglo-Saxon general population. There are a great many more Anglo-Saxons on the island of England. England does not exist now, but on the island of England, than there are Danes. The Danes are horribly outnumbered, and yet they control most of the island. Well, this is for two reasons. The first reason is that while there are a lot of Saxons in England, they all have different lords. They don't cooperate very well, and some of them have actually gone into the service of the Danes, so that does not help their cause. But another reason is, and I'm going to go into another experimental facet of this, is we're going to have quotes from a historical novel or series of novels to give the feel of the time, because that's really what we're talking about here in terms of the arms and the armament. What they invoked in the person who wore them, the person who saw them, the person who was victimized by them, and the person they served. So the first quote that we're going to read is, "I think only one man in three is a warrior, and sometimes not even that many. But in our army, every man is a fighter. If you do not want to be a warrior, you stay home in Denmark. You till the soil, herd sheep, fish the sea, but you do not take to the ships and do not be a fighter. But here in England, every man is forced to fight. Yet only one in three, or maybe only one in four, has the belly for it. The rest are farmers who just want to run. We are sheep. We're wolves fighting sheep." That last part, the next to last sentence is the important part. Farmers want to run. So, the English military forces, and I'm going to refer to the English and Anglo-Saxon interchangeably here because of my own historical teachings. Understand, England does in no way exist. I am not implying that England exists, but I will flip back and forth into that. The English forces are the households of noble lords who are very well trained and very well armed. and the feared, which are farmers like Bjornwolf, who owe fealty to a lord and are allowed to work the land in exchange for service, the portion of the crops, and for a certain level of military service. This is not like the feudal service a knight owes a lord. That will be more developed in the High Middle Ages. But this is, he can be called up to half the year in some cases. All of these are somewhat culturally different throughout the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. There's no universal service that is owed to someone, which I thought was very fascinating, considering it's literally the same culture, even though they had the kingdoms. But this was not the case. So Sven is a farmer. You know what farmers are? They're poor. Do you know what armor is? It's expensive. So, most of the fear go into weapons. We're going to battle with weapons that are essentially farm implements, and some of them it's actually farm implements. Some of the very first pole arms were small plows attached to sticks. That is literally. Some of these men were going to battle with hoes. Now, let me be clear here. You can be killed by a hoe. So, let's say, you sir and I, let's say that the two of you are engaged in a wager. And you had to pick wagering a large sum of money on the difference of a fight between me and this gentleman. Okay? You have to wager a large sum of money. Well, right now it might be hard for you to decide that. We're both just two men standing here. But I give him a hug. That changes your opinion, right? What if I get this? Does that change your opinion? He gets a hoe, I get this. That probably changes your opinion slightly. Then I get mail. Does that change your opinion? And then I get a shield, a nice heavy shield. If you want, you can pass this around. Just feel the weight of it. That is very much.
You get heavy after a while.
I'm curious if it's. Oh, I'm standing on my own. Yours is heavier than my coffee. That's a heavy shit. Jesus, man. No wonder you have to do lifts all the darn time. You can't even hold up your own shield. Good God, man. Mine's metal.
And then I get this. So now I have mail, a helmet, a sword, a sturdy shield, and he still has a hoe. Anybody want to change their bets? Which is, of course, is the point. What we're talking about is never an even contest. But now, what if I give both of you a hoe, and you have to bet on me versus the two of them? Does that change things? No, it probably doesn't. What about if I take those two and him, and I give him a hoe? Now does that change things? What if I give those two a hoe and I give her an axe? Does that change things? The point is that no matter how good my stuff is, there's a point to where enough guys with hoes and axes will beat me. Maybe I kill one of them. Probably I kill more than one of them. But I still die. And this is the Danish conundrum. The Danes can't lose a lot of blood because they're already outnumbered. So they can't go into battle, into pitched battles where they don't have every advantage. So we want every advantage. So what do? Well, first of all, we need to convince our warriors that we're the best. And that's easy enough with the Danish mythology of the Norse gods and the berserk and everything. So they work that into the system of Not only do I need to frighten my opponent, but I need to bolster myself. This is very much psychological warfare. That's a thing that a lot of people don't get. Is psychological warfare isn't just tearing down your opponent, it's building up your guys. I am going to convince you that you are greater than you are. And if you think you are greater than you are, you will be. That's also psychological fact. People who are confident and believe they can do a thing are actually more likely to do that thing. And leaders in the Middle Ages, and particularly in the Dark Ages, knew this. They very much bought into that aspect of the culture. Now, understand that this type of fighting that they will do, particularly the fighting during invasion and the shield wall, is brutal, terrible fighting in a way that the modern mind probably can't conceive, because it is fighting up close with axes and spears and swords cutting at you from every angle, and the only thing that is protecting you is your shield, your armor, and your buddies. In the modern war, as terrible as it is, we kill people from yards and yards and miles away. This is very much up close. And I'm going to use another quote to drive this home. It's, "The fear came then. The shield wall is a terrible place. It is where a warrior makes his reputation, and reputation is dear to us. Reputation is honor, but to gain that honor, a man must stand in the shield wall where death runs rampant. I had been in the shield wall at Sinuan, and I knew the smell of death, the stink of it, the uncertainty of survival, the horror of the axes and swords and spears, and I feared it, and it was coming. 30 paces, 20, and you can see the eyes of the men who will try to kill you. And you see the spear blades, and the instinct is to stop, to straighten your shields. We cringe from battle. Fear claws at us. Time seems to stop. There is silence, though 1,000 men shout. And at that moment, when terror savages the heart like a trapped beast, you must hurl yourself into the horror, because the enemy feels the same. You have come to kill him. You are the beast from his nightmares." This is very much on both sides among the most trained warriors, how they had to have been feeling. Because these are people, like, the feared will run. The feared, over time, the Saxons will learn that the feared is only really good when it's fighting behind fortifications. When fighting behind fortifications, a bunch of guys with a hoe become a lot more fearsome. With hoes and axes and pitchforks and things like that, when your enemy is attacking up an embankment and then they're fighting over a palisade, it becomes much different. But right now, the fear is what the household warriors and the Danes, there's serious consequences to running away. Because you gain reputation, which is word fame, through what you do. And you lose it through what you do. People will only follow you if they believe you will lead them to victory, if they believe you are brave. Men who run away don't win silver, they don't win gold. And we're going to pause for a moment and talk about something else that we're going to discuss in greater detail. But running away is dangerous. You are never easier to kill when you've turned to right. I can tell you right now, if you learn few things from SCA fighting, you learn that a person who's looking to get away is the most vulnerable person in the world. Because they're undecided and they're making that turn. And in that turn, they can't possibly hurt you. When someone can't hurt you, you can be very aggressive. So, this is the circumstance that we're in. Now, another aspect of psychological warfare that happens is, and that comes from appearance, is that people tell stories about you. Now, this is where we first start to get into the appearance of the arms and armor. Most of us know this helmet, right? But now I want you to picture it. You're standing on a battlefield. You are untrained. You have no armor and a terrible weapon. And there's a man across from you wearing this helmet. You don't even know he's a man. For all you know, he could be a terror from the gods come to kill you. Now let's talk about religion for just a second. This is the only time we're going to talk about religion in this class. But the Danes believe in their Norse deities, and they believe that they are sent here to win and to conquer and to kill. Sven believes that. He believes that the best thing that can happen to him is to die in battle with a sword in his hand, because if he does so, he will go to Valhalla, where he will fight and feast and drink forever. If you believe that, if you really believe that, do you feel braver? Do you feel like you can take chances? Do you feel like if I do die here, the reward is worth it? Meanwhile, Bjornulf has been told by priests two things. He has been told that God will save him if he believes hard enough. But he's also been told that the Danes are demons from hell. Those are two pretty conflicting messages if you think about it. God will save me if I believe hard enough, but he hasn't thrown those demons out of Northumbria yet. So let's talk now for a second about word fame and how it spreads. One of the things that happens at this particular time period, and the Danes adapt this better than the Saxons do, is the use of banners and anthropological symbols of animals worked into their personal symbols to identify them. Let's be clear. People who pick animals for their symbols believe there's some connotation or something they admire, something that this animal represents that they would like to emulate. So this is a stag. You know what stags are? Vain. They're vain and they're cocky and they're prideful. At least this is the association that we have been given them over the centuries. They are also defend the herd. They do not run and leave the weak behind. They will fight. And no matter what people tell you about wolves, one wolf fights one stag, the stag wins every time. I guarantee it. So, now picture yourself as Bjornulf. And you hear constant stories of the savagery of the Danes. And of particular Danes, they tell these stories about. And this is where we get into the real psychological warfare of the arms and weapons. Because the devices and the arms and the weapons become entrenched in the aura and the word fame of the great warriors. And so that at a battle, Bjornulf looks across the field. He doesn't see just a bunch of Danes. He sees the wolf's head banner and the raven banner. Sagard's raven banner. Sagard, who killed Obeloth by the sea, who, like, these men have become beyond legends into that demigod, hero sort of mythology, where it isn't just that these Danes have come to kill them, but these unkillable warriors, these reapers of souls have come to get him. And he knows that Sagard's sword, his famous sword Ice Spike, known for cleaving other swords. Now, this actually happened. About the same time period, at least one or more Frankish smiths discovered a way to create better quality steel. And they made a number of blades. All of them have been marked with the Utrecht markings, but they probably aren't all the same person. They're probably a group of smiths. Whatever it was, their steel was significantly stronger than others. And Vikings specifically Danes, noticed this and would raid Frankish lands to get them. And these is where we get these sorts of legends. These swords, the legends, have certainly been exacerbated. But the reality was these swords would cleave poorer blades. So you add in that little kernel of truth to the word fame of these men, and you have real fear of these people that gets you before you ever see them, before they ever come in contact. They're there. They're in northern Northumbria. They're coming for you and everything about you. They're going to take your land, your women, your cattle. They're going to destroy everything. And that's what you have to fight. Now, let's talk about this helmet, though, from the other side of the guy who has it. That's beautiful, right? That's craftsmanship. It's also Anglo-Saxon, by the way. Remember, there are a few of the Anglo-Saxons who have the same abilities and the same traits and the same as the Danes. But when most of the Anglo-Saxon military powers are feared, that's where this becomes. The Anglo-Saxon warriors are going to be afraid of the Danes, and the Danes are going to be afraid of the Anglo-Saxon warriors because you don't want to die. Particularly when trained, skilled fighters come together, it's ugly and brutal, and a lot of people die. They don't want that to happen. But why would you make something like this? Rather, not the craftsman. Why would you want something like this? So, first, I do not want to discount art for art's sake here. For millennia, people have wanted to create art solely because they loved art, solely because they liked art. People want to wear nice things made by beautiful craftsmen and all of this. But also, doesn't this just scream, I'm powerful, I'm strong, brave? The placards are all scenes of prowess and valor. The cloisonné garments, wealth. And in this time period, wealth, power, and prowess all work together. This is not a time for weak kings. We get that later. Weak kings die in this time period. Even Alfred the Great, who was, by most accounts, a scholarly king, afflicted with hemorrhoids from a young age, took to the battlefield. So we know, because we know that, but he took to the battlefield because you could not be weak. A weak king could not rule. Now, let's look at a couple other pieces, because I want to point out that this is Sword Hill. I want you to pass it around so you can see the intricate working on it. This is a sword pommel. You do the same thing.
I also heard King Alfred had a Crohn's disease. What would be modern day Crohn's disease?
There is evidence to support that. I don't know that there's any way to determine it, but it would remark on the period, things that are attributed to his behavior. So, why would you put so much effort into the part of a sword that doesn't do work? Art for art's sake is part of it. Make no mistake. But the other part is, you ever heard clothes make the man? Right? We think that man in a nice tailored suit. Usually we think this person has something going on. It's the same principle. You want to follow a successful war leader. You want someone who's going to bring you silver. Well, a guy who's dripping in gold can probably bring you silver. This enhances his personal power. Gold giver is a term that is used in these time periods to represent someone who's both generous and powerful. You don't have the gold. And so when I give gold, people brag. My Lord gave me 4 pieces of gold for my fighting in Sinuate. And they tell people, and they tell people. And now, people, the width and breadth of the Saxon lands, hear about how the Danish war leaders are giving out gold. And when you give gold to someone, they enter your service. And so a guy who's giving out a lot of gold is raising a lot of men. And if you're raising a lot of men, you generally only have one thing you're going to do with those men. There's more fear. They're raising them. What are they going to do with them? Now maybe they're going to go raid Frankie. They could go to Ireland. But they're probably going to Wessex. So, now, we want to talk about 2 types of fear. Indirect fear. And that's what we've pretty much been discussing for most of this class so far. You hear about the great prowess of men that you believe eventually are going to come and to try to take your lands. That breeds fear, it breeds dread, and all of that. All of those things weigh on a society. But it's nothing like direct fear. And direct fear is the reason why we want to use appearance as psychological warfare. Because a person who's afraid is a terrible fighter. We talk about the fight or flight instinct as if a 50% chance I'll fight, 50% chance I'll run. That's not how it works. Almost everyone runs. A few people fight, but it doesn't mean they fight well. Remember, there's a whole lot of head game to fighting. A man who's terrified is not thinking. He's not going to do the strategically smart thing. He's going to panic. And as he panics, he's going to make mistakes. His mistakes may just get him killed. Depending on who he is, his panic may get his entire army destroyed. So, I want to talk about how the physical aspects of fear. Because fear has physiological effects. Among the effects are shaking, sweating, nausea, dry mouth, rapid breathing, heart palpitations, dizziness, and muscle contractions. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the shield wall. This is not a light shield, right? So now picture I'm here. I haven't started fighting yet. I'm sweating. It's running in my eyes. My heart's palpitating. I'm rapidly breathing, which means I'm getting less oxygen than I would if I were breathing normally. And you know what else I'm afraid people do? They grip things tightly. When you grip things tightly, you build up lactic acid. When you build up lactic acid, you get weaker and weaker and weaker, and eventually you cramp. So if I can have a guy across from me, frightened, waiting, undergoing all of that, and I'm not, that's a huge advantage for me. That's why all of this matters. That and getting the army to break. And that's what we're about to go over. Now, we're going to go over now we're going to switch over to the point of view of the Danes for just a second. Because the Danes, remember, don't want to lose, guys. They want to win fights quickly, decisively, or they want to get ransomed. This is the favorite Danish Viking tactic of all time. If I can get you to pay me to go away, if I don't think I can conquer the land, I want you to get me to pay me to go away. And if I can do that without fighting, then I take my men away. None of them have died. I will take the money that you have given me, and I'll distribute it among my men. Then more men will come to my banner, who I paid with your money, and eventually enough will come where I can take your land. I mean, it's not that complicated. It's very effective. You would be surprised throughout history, though, how many people did not understand this. This, in fact, this idea is how eventually William the Conqueror ends up the King of England, because some of the remnants of the great heathen army with some other Viking invaders went to France and so successfully extorted the French nobility over time that they gave them Normandy so that they wouldn't destroy Paris. They gave them one of the best chunks of their country so they wouldn't invade them. And this is how we get Normans. So if you ever get angry at Normans, and you probably should, you can blame them on the French nobility and their unwillingness to understand they were being extorted. But sometimes it does come to bite. And the Danes, the Anglo-Saxons are going to form a shield wall too, the ones who have shield. Now we understand the feared is going to be lightly armored. Few of them may have shields. If they've been at a site of an Anglo-Saxon victory before, they may well have shields. But men do not relish the shield wall. They do not rush to death's embrace. You look ahead and you see the overlapping shields, the helmet, the glint of axes and spears and swords, and you must go into the reach of these blades, into the place of death, and it takes time to summon the courage, to heat the blood, to let the madness overtake caution. So, a thing that is done in the time period are insults. They would shout in some times ridiculous insults. But part of those insults are also bragging. And this is where this becomes very important. Imagine that warrior with his great shield, his fine helmet, and his mail, and his sword, and he comes out and he starts talking crap. And he's like, come on out. Come to your death. Now, you're a Saxon. Let's say you're a Saxon leader. You have good stuff too. But you have heard of the exploits of this person. You've heard how they've defeated other good warriors, how they have led raids and conquered places. And now he's standing there, outside of his shield wall, calling you forward. Are you to go? What have you done? What do your men think? You just told your men you can't beat him. If you can't beat him one-on-one, maybe you can't beat him later. This is very much a time period where individual prowess and military prowess are very, very tightly interwound. This guy's calling for you. He's saying, come forward, come on, come die. Come die, dog. And you're getting even more afraid. And the fear is building. And it's building on both sides. But one side will be more afraid than the other. You can guarantee it. And this is in the shield wall. Out on the edges of the Anglo-Saxon is the fear. And they're terrified. Some of the guys on the Danish side will go taunt them. Now the feared will in no way come out. They're in no way going to come outside lines. It's not going to happen. But they see a man walk out in armor and weapons worth what their children, their grandchildren, their grandchildren's grandchildren, and their people onto perhaps today will never earn the economic equivalent. And this man is walking out, didn't bring anybody else with him, and he's come to kill them all. This man is unafraid. How do you fight a guy who's unafraid? When you're terrified and you see the boar on his helmet or the raven and you see his banner in the distance and everything about this man screams killer and everything about you screams victim and you know it, you're gonna run. Which is, in almost all battles, what happens. The shield walls will hit, and the shield walls will fight. They will pretty much grind on each other for a while. But what happens is that inevitably, one shield wall is longer than the other. Or the fear is on the ends. Because for some reason, no one ever thought about intermingling the units so that the feared could fight with armed men who were brave and would not run and could bolster them. So often the feared would just run before the fighting actually really begins. For this purposes, though, we're not going to imagine that because that sort of cuts down what's going to happen. I'm going to read you another quote from a book about how being armored makes you feel. Because I'm going to tell you something about SCA armor. All right. A thing we don't talk tons about is that SCA fighting is pretty violent. I mean, it just is. We're hitting each other with sticks. Now, none of us wants to damage anyone, right? These are our friends. We love them. We don't want them injured. But there's a significant violent element to it. When you put on your armor, there's a transformative process that goes about. If you look at experienced fighters who put their armor on the same way every time. Now, part of that is because there is a best way to do it. There are some ways you just can't simply put it on out of order. But also, it becomes a almost ritual, so to speak. Because you're transforming yourself from whoever you are in the mundane world, however you are with your friends, to a person who's going to walk out there, who's going to face someone who they might love like a brother, and is going to beat them down with a club. That's the reality of it. So as the armor goes on, you become different. You become that warrior, that killer, that striker of foes. Well, this is magnified times 1,000 in this time period. So this was, I stood in my war glory. The armorings of fallen enemies glinted on my forearms. My shield was painted with the snarling wolf's head of my house, while another wolf, this one of silver, crouched on the crest of my polished helmet. My mail was tight, polished with sand, my sword belt and scabbard, bridle and saddle were studded with silver. There was gold at my neck, my boots were paneled with silver, and my drawn sword was gray with the whorls of its making from the hilt to its hungry tip. I was a lord of war mounted on a great black horse, and together we would make panic. And that's the purpose, to look almost otherworldly. This is a thing, a creature from the gods or a creature from hell that has come to kill and destroy and to take everything that I have and everything that I love, and I cannot stop it. Now, we all like to think that if we're fighting to defend our country or our town or our borough or whatever, that we're going to stand there with our hoe, because the 5 of us with our hoes might can kill that guy. But few people want to volunteer to be the 2 or 3 guys he kills in the process. And we've used word fame and songs and stories to feed that fear from afar. And now they've seen the banners unfurled as the battles start to start. And we know that this person is there, and we know all the things that they've done, and we know how they have killed and taken everything that they wanted, and no one has been able to stop them. And now they're here in front of us. And you're standing there with a hug. It's a lot to ask someone to stand there and fight with a hug. In fact, it's unreasonable and a eventually the Saxons figured this out. So now, put yourself in the mind of Bjorn Wolf and his hoe. All of that is happening. But the truth of the matter is, too, is that he is racked with fear. He is afraid in a way that few of us have ever had a concept of, unless you've had a gun pointed at you. If you've ever had a gun pointed at you, there's a specific, immediate fear that's very relatable. But I should say a gun pointed at a really angry person. But so, all of this has been carefully orchestrated. From the armor, to the swords, to the banners, to the songs, because this goes back to gold giving. People just don't generally write songs about you. You have to do something. First you have to do something awesome, but even then, lots of people do awesome things. They're not in songs. In this particular time period, you have to give them gold. Now we're back to gold again. You have to have gold to give it, to get the word fame from the songs, and you have to have been good at prowess or leadership to get the gold, start the whole process. So what it essentially is it's a function of force multipliers. Sven is new, but he kicks ass. He gets gold. He gives gold to his men. They tell people. He gives gold to skalds who make songs for him. His men sing the songs. Other people hear about the songs his men sing. Eventually, the Saxons hear about Sven, who has killed 14 giants and walked across the Irish Channel, because we all know how these things change over time. And now, here we are. You're Bjorn Wolf with a hoe, and you're fighting a legendary figure who's completely armored from head to toe, encased in gold and silver, in all his war glory. And this is your life. So, this is why the fear arises. And this is why all of this stuff is done. Taken out of its toe, taken individually, it seems like a lot of these things are kind of either immaterial or foolish. Like paying skalds to write songs about you. That sounds vain, right? Like if we just talk about, that sounds like, man, there's a guy who really wants to hear how great he is. No, there's a guy who really wants you to hear how great he is. All of it is psychological warfare. All of it has been designed to cause fear, to cause indirect fear in a population until such time as they use it to cause direct fear in that population. And it also uses psychology to make your guys feel better about their chances of surviving. And they'll fight braver. They'll be less likely to run. They'll fight more aggressively. They'll follow your lead. It's all been by design. I'm going to tell you right now, too, when we were talking about the transformative effect of armoring up, by the time I get all my stuff on, I feel pretty good about myself. I feel pretty good about my chances of winning these fights. There's a very specific self-confidence that comes with being well-armed, well-armored, no matter how good your opponent is. When your opponent might have a hoe, I can only imagine that it's pretty awesome to have all this stuff. So you see, that's how that works. And so what happens is eventually the shield walls do hit. And they push back and forward, and there'll be blood. The first few people will die. The mud and blood will get turned up in the mud, into mud. There'll be screaming and crying and wailing. And let's say it's the middle that's hit. And the Danes are advancing on your unit, and you have your head. And down the line you see your immediate future. You see men being eviscerated. You see limbs being chopped off. You see intestines falling to the ground. You see grown men of great honor and prowess crying in pain and terror, and you're already terrified. So you run. That's what happens. You will run. All of this, all of it, the weapons, the armor, the stories, all of it has been designed to make you unwilling to fight. Because the truth is there are more of you than them. And you can beat them if you're willing to pay the price and if you're brave enough to stand there. But they beat you with fear. Fear is a fantastic weapon. It's really underappreciated in much of our historical discussions. When we read about battles and we look at these battles and we say, well, why did this person do this? Well, that's real easy to say, sitting in my living room with my air conditioning making me cool while I have an ice cold adult beverage in my hand and I had a great dinner and I'm not terrified and that my next decision probably will not result in the end of my line. Or fear warps everything that we do. There's also, there is an interesting psychological phenomenon that is surprisingly true. And it is that we are more afraid to lose than we are encouraged to win. What I mean by that is, if I offered you a chance to bet $20 on the flip of a quarter, I believe in the neighborhood of 74% of people would not take that gamble, even though you have an identical chance of winning as you do losing. Loss aversion, it's a thing. That's fear exacerbates loss aversion. That's also one of the psychological side effects. Now, here at the end of this class, I want to bring this up on a positive note, particularly for the Saxons, because I really ran the Saxons down. You know, the Saxons do beat the Danes. When they do it with fear. Alfred begins a great project, and they begin to building what are called burrs. Now, the burr comes from the burr, the hard nut, but that is where burrow comes from. Burrs are fortified towns. The first ones are fortified towns that had remnants of the old Roman walls. These things could become virtually impregnable if people were manning them, because the technology for siege engines had regressed significantly after the fall of Rome, and the Danes didn't use siege engines at all. It was contrary to their entire ethos of fighting. So Alfred starts building these burrs. Remember when I told you the Danes did not want to lose men for no reason because they didn't have enough of them? Now, attacking fortified towns, that's a great way to lose men. You are going to lose men. So now you put Bjorn Wolf in there with his hoe and his 5 buddies with the hoe, and Sven has to climb up an embankment and then gets to a palisade. He has to try to put up a ladder and climb up the palisade. All while Bjorn Wolf and his buddies are hacking at him with his hoes. Sven probably not going to make it. Then the Danes become afraid to attack the Saxon towns. And the burrs were close enough that they could support each other and that people could get their goods and valuables into the burrs with relatively short notice. So now the Danes become afraid of loss in attacking these burrs. And it fundamentally changes how battles happen in that period of time. And that's fundamentally how the Anglo-Saxons survived as a culture. Because the reality was they came very close to being annihilated in what would become England. But all of this happened because of fear and the use of it. And that's what I really hope that this class shows like these people were doing this on purpose. It wasn't just an accident that they adopted these animal symbols and that they etched them all on their armor and their weapons, and they let themselves be seen in it by their supporters to make them more confident, to draw more men to them. And then the stories would sow fear and panic among their enemies, at which point, when they showed up for the actual battle, it only became exasperated. This was done specifically. And now, we're going to go back to the quotes at the beginning, and then we'll be done. Beowulf tells us it was on purpose because terror ornaments. If you thought that someone had nice armor because they thought it was pretty, you wouldn't call it a terror ornament. If you thought they had it because it was functional, you wouldn't call it a terror ornament. There are plenty instances in historical writings where we talk about swords cleaving other swords, or helms being stout, and things of that nature. They use it. The writer uses terror ornaments because he knows they were chosen for that purpose. He's telling us why these things are being worn. So that's my class. I hope everybody had a good time. If you have any questions, feel free. I realize it is not quite the standard SCA class, and I was shooting for that because of the quote at the beginning. I think sometimes we don't focus on these things that were used. There's an article I have that I got on the Staffordshire Horde, which is an Anglo-Saxon horde. But it very much goes into this in very deep psychological detail. If anyone is interested, you can contact me on Facebook and I'll give it to you. It's a little dry, it gets pretty deep into humanistic behavior, and I thought it was well much for the course of an ASCA class. But it's, in essence, it says that the people used the armor and the appearance of the armor and things like that to basically become cyborgs, to become inhuman. We know the Greeks did this, by the way. The Greeks, the Corinthian helm and the breastplate is designed to show as little humanity as possible. You are not fighting men, you're fighting a line of bronze. So, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you have any questions later, I have a ton of stuff I researched on this. And it was odd how much stuff was out there about it when I finally looked. But thank you all for coming.